In November 1959, Britain opened a road unlike anything it had ever seen. No speed limit, no crash barriers, no lighting, just 72 miles of new tarmac, including its branch roads stretching from Watford to Rugby. Within 4 days, 2 men were already dead on it. But for Britain's lorry industry, the real damage was only just beginning. This road did not just move goods faster, it exposed every weakness in every British truck on the road, and it killed some of those brands forever. Before November 1959, moving a lorry load of goods from London to Birmingham meant one thing: the A road. A driver heading north from London had to crawl through Dunstable, grind through Northampton, and creep through every junction in between. He stopped for every set of traffic lights, every tractor pulling out of a farmyard, every market town that had been built across the road before the motor vehicle existed. On a good day, that run took most of a working day. On a bad one, it took all of it and then some. British lorries were designed around exactly that kind of work. Short hauls, stop-start progress, speeds that rarely broke 30 miles an hour. The Gardner 6LX engine, which powered a huge share of Britain's heavy trucks through the 1950s, produced around 150 horsepower in automotive tune. For a road haulage at those speeds, that was enough. No operator needed more. No manufacturer thought to offer more. The haulage industry had also just survived a massive political shake-up. In 1948, the Labour government nationalised road haulage under an organisation called British Road Services. By 1952, BRS had absorbed 3,766 private haulage firms, 41,265 vehicles, and 80,212 workers. Most lorries making any journey over 40 miles during the 1950s were BRS vehicles. Then the Conservatives returned to power in 1951 and started reversing it. The Transport Act 1953 formalised the sale of BRS assets back to private hands. Thousands of small hauliers set up again. They bought the trucks they knew: AEC, Leyland, ERF, Foden, Atkinson, Guy, Scammell, British built, reliable. Cheap to run, drivers had a name for them: Gaffer's Lorries. No frills, no nonsense, just a cab, a chassis, and a dependable engine. ERF had been building lorries in Sandbach, Cheshire since 1933, founded by Edwin Richard Foden after a bitter split from his own family firm. Foden, the company he had left behind, still operated from the very same town. Two bitter rivals, same small village. Same engineering tradition. Atkinson built Lorries in Preston. AEC operated out of Southall. Guy Motors ran from Wolverhampton. These were not glamorous businesses. They were precise, careful manufacturers who knew their customers and knew exactly what British roads demanded. Nobody was planning for motorways. Britain did not have any. That was about to change. The idea of a British motorway had been discussed for decades. A plan for a road linking London and Birmingham was put forward as far back as 1923. It went nowhere. World War II put everything on hold. It was not until the Special Roads Act 1949 that the government was given the legal authority to build roads limited to specific vehicle classes. The first piece of motorway was the Preston Bypass in Lancashire, just over 8 miles long, opened in December 1958. It was a start, but it was not enough to change the industry. The M1 was different. On November 2nd, 1959, Minister of Transport Ernest Marples stood near the village of Slip End, south of Luton, and opened Britain's first full-length motorway. The road had been built in just 19 months. 5,000 workers, most of them Irish, had moved 11.5 million cubic yards of soil, poured 300,000 cubic yards of concrete, and built 132 bridges. They worked at roughly 1 mile every 8 days. The total bill for the main stretch came to £16.5 million. The main motorway ran 55 miles from Junction 5 near Watford to Junction 18 at Crick in Northamptonshire, totalling 72 miles of new tarmac when including its 2 branch roads. No speed limit, no central reservation, no lighting, no hard shoulders. 3 lanes in each direction on a 14-inch concrete base topped with asphalt. On opening day, people drove it the way they would visit a new attraction. Families took day trips. Car drivers pushed their vehicles harder than they had driven before in their lives. The UK's first motorway service station, Watford Gap, opened the same morning. 4 days later, on November 6, 1959, 2 lorry drivers were killed in fog on the M1. Britain's first motorway fatalities. There were no barriers, no warning systems, no way to slow traffic in sudden poor visibility. The human cost was immediate. But there was another cost developing quietly, invisibly, in the engine bays and cab designs of every lorry then in production across Britain. A lorry on an A road in the 1950s spent a large part of its working day stopped or crawling, traffic lights, level crossings, village high streets. A Gardner engine hauling a full load at 30 miles an hour, through all of that was doing its job exactly as designed. Put that same lorry on the M1 and run it at full speed under full load for 2 hours straight. 4 problems appeared almost immediately. The first was power. Sustained motorway running demanded far more than 150 horsepower. British trucks laboured. They fell behind traffic. They forced cars and faster vehicles to go around them constantly. Hauliers running M1 routes started complaining almost immediately after opening. The second problem was durability under sustained load. A roadwork put a different kind of stress on engines and gearboxes. Lots of stopping and starting, lots of gear changes, lots of low-speed strain. Motorway work put sustained pressure on every mechanical component for long, uninterrupted periods. Some trucks revealed weaknesses that nobody had ever seen before, because nobody had run them like this before. The third problem was the cab. On a road routes, a driver made short trips with natural brakes at deliveries, fuel stops and junctions. Motorway work changed that completely. A driver could now be behind the wheel for 5 or 6 hours without a reason to stop. British lorry cabs were not built for that. They were noisy, cramped, poorly insulated and barely furnished. No radio. Very few had any kind of sleeping bunk. One driver who later switched to a foreign lorry described his old Leyland cab as having a piece of canvas strung between 2 metal poles as the seat. 6 hours in that cab was punishment. The fourth problem was engine access. When a truck broke down on the hard shoulder, getting to the engine quickly was critical. Most British heavy lorries had fixed cabs. Reaching the engine meant removing panels and working awkwardly around the structure. On a busy motorway with traffic passing at speed, that took far too long and put the driver in danger far too often. None of these problems were new. Nobody had noticed them because nobody had ever needed trucks to work this way. The motorway made them impossible to ignore any longer. British manufacturers moved to respond. The first major answer came from Foden. In 1962, the Sandbach firm introduced the S24, Britain's first mass-produced tilting cab on a heavy lorry. Foden had been working with glass-reinforced plastic in cab construction since 1958, which made a tilt mechanism achievable without a punishing weight penalty. With one lever, the entire cab tipped forward and exposed the engine completely. The press nicknamed it Sabrina. It was a practical solution to a real problem. It worked. Leyland followed in 1965 with the ergomatic cab. It also tilted. It was quieter, better padded, and gave drivers meaningfully more headroom. For a British truck cab, it set a new standard. Then came the regulation changes that cut deeper than any design decision could. In 1964, the government changed the construction and use regulations. The new rules favoured articulated vehicles, a tractor unit pulling a semi-trailer over the older rigid 8-wheelers that had dominated British roads since before the war. Almost overnight, manufacturers who had built their entire product ranges around rigid lorries had to rethink everything they made. Then in the late 1960s, regulations shifted again. The 4x2 tractor unit became the most practical and cost-effective format for serious long-haul work. More payload per trip, less dead weight, more flexibility. Manufacturers scrambled through 2 complete redesigns in under a decade. That cost money that smaller companies often did not have. And while Britain's truck builders were fighting to keep up, something was coming from across the North Sea that made every domestic problem dramatically worse. Ailsa Trucks, a Scottish importer, brought the first foreign-built lorry ever sold commercially in the United Kingdom. It was a Volvo, the F86 model. It found early customers in Scotland and the north of England, operators running exactly the kind of long motorway routes where British trucks were visibly struggling. Independent tests found the F86's in-cab noise level was described as more akin to a saloon car than a lorry. It had a rest shelf behind the seats, where a driver could actually sleep during break time. British hauliers had never seen a production lorry with that feature. Then came the F88, turbocharged, more powerful than any comparable British truck then available. A proper sleeper cab, synchromesh gearbox, Quiet enough to hold a normal conversation inside at full motorway speed, DAF followed Volvo into the British market, then Scania, then Mercedes Benz. Each new model offered more power and more driver comfort than the British equivalent could match. Drivers began refusing to work for companies still running British lorries. Hauliers faced a simple choice: keep losing experienced drivers or buy foreign. Most of them bought foreign. At the heart of this was the Gardner engine problem. Gardner engines were economical and almost indestructible. They were also underpowered for the motorway era, and the fix was turbocharging. Chief designer Hugh Gardner refused to allow it under any circumstances. When his own nephew Paul secretly developed a turbocharged prototype inside the factory, Hugh found out and gave him one choice: stop the work, or Hugh would resign. Paul stopped the work. Hugh stayed. Gardner fell further behind Cummins, Perkins and Rolls-Royce on power output with every passing year. The engine that had powered British haulage for a generation had become the reason operators went shopping in Sweden instead. By the end of the 1970s, the commercial motor described the decade this way. At the start, there were 20 British truck manufacturers. By the end, AEC, Albion, Atkinson, BMC, Commer, Guy and Thornycroft had all been consigned to the history books. Leyland's response to the crisis was to absorb every competitor it could reach. In 1962, it bought Associated Commercial Vehicles, which included AEC and Thornycroft. In 1968, it merged with British Motor Holdings to create the British Leyland Motor Corporation, pulling Guy, Daimler, Austin and Morris Commercial into one giant organisation. On paper, it was one of the largest vehicle groups in the world. In reality, it was too large and too complicated to manage, and its car divisions bled cash throughout the 1970s without stopping. The truck divisions were starved of investment. AEC, which had been building lorries since 1912 and was one of the most respected names in British commercial vehicles, was shut down by British Leyland in 1979. Not sold, not transferred. Closed, Foden hit a financial crisis in 1974 after building an enormous new factory based on projections of a sales boom that never arrived. Harold Wilson's Labour government provided support to keep it alive. The company was sold to the American firm PACCAR in 1980. The Foden name lasted another 26 years before PACCAR retired it in 2006. Atkinson rejected formal takeover approaches from both ERF and Foden in 1970. That independence lasted months. Later that year, it was absorbed by Seddon to form Seddon Atkinson. In 1974, the American company International Harvester bought Seddon Atkinson. By 1985, the brand held only 5% of the British truck market. ERF survived the longest as an independent British lorry manufacturer. It was sold to the German company MAN in 2000. The Middlewich factory closed in 2002. MAN retired the ERF badge entirely in 2007, one road, 72 miles. It opened on a November morning in 1959, and the country drove it like a day out. But for every British lorry manufacturer that had spent 50 years building trucks for 30-mile-an-hour roads, that morning was not a celebration. It was the start of a 20-year test. The test asked one question: can you build a truck powerful enough, comfortable enough and efficient enough for the long-haul motorway world Britain had just created? Most of them could not, and the brands that could not answer that question did not survive to ask another.